Cancel culture continues to widen its net, while numerous congenital idiots persist in denying that it exists, even while they're actually trying to get people cancelled. Random House, Norman Mailer's publisher, cancelled a collection designed to celebrate the centenary of his birth. The best-selling children's author, Gillian Phillips, was fired by her publisher for tweeting, "I stand with J.K. Rowling." Right-wing pundit Dan Bongino had his YouTube channel deleted before being banned from the site. And Republican politician Marjorie Taylor Greene had her Twitter account deleted, though she retains a business account. As usual, the victims are all right-leaning figures who challenge the leftist cultural hegemony, which is why all those who deny that cancel culture exists are always left-wing provocateurs. Our society has turned to summoning the mob and setting it on any voices that deviate from the party line. What's going on is nothing less than a digital book burning, and, in my opinion, this culture benefits no one. Let's take Green as an example. Now, I can't tell, because her account's gone, but it's been alleged that she posted questionable views on 9/11, QAnon, the January 6th Capitol riot, the supposedly rigged election of 2020, and the recent global ailment I'm not allowed to even mention. Now, for the sake of argument, let's say that she did. Let's say that she's aired the most bafflingly stupid opinions on all those topics and more. Here's why I still don't think she should be silenced. For one thing, the truth is only ever arrived at through debate, through challenging bad ideas and debunking them in open dialogue. If we start suppressing ideas, we'll never be able to ascertain the truth, because certain positions will simply be protected from being challenged, and then we'll never be able to gauge their veracity. We also think by vocalising ideas. So any stifling of dialogue has a stultifying effect on the human brain, on the very cognitive capabilities of human beings. Green is also a public servant subject to elections. So if she holds questionable views, it's better for her electorate to hear them, to be aware of them, so that they can make an informed decision at the ballot box. Shielding the voters from dodgy opinions does not protect them. It leaves them vulnerable to shysters who should be kept as far away from political office as possible. And also, it's much better for us to be exposed to the occasional idiot, or even streams of idiots, than for a tiny clique of 5 or 6 Silicon Valley billionaires to decide what everybody else is allowed to say, or hear, or think. That way lies totalitarianism and madness. Now, this channel has felt the full brunt of cancel culture too. Several of my films have been deleted, including one on the death of liberty, which is at least funny. Many more have been blocked, and a significant number have been restricted to limited audiences. YouTube also delete every single comment I make on my own channel. The company never explains why it does this. It never lets its users know which of their alleged guidelines have been broken, which arbitrary boundaries have been transgressed. This way, the site's content creators can never know how to prevent similar bans from happening in the future. The site's guidelines are also terribly vague, allowing them open to the interpretation or peccadilloes of whichever censorious watchdog passes their irreversible decrees. From my perspective, all their bans seem political, rather than motivated by protecting any sort of neutral standards. Though I've also learned, if approaching the recent global malady that's dominated our lives for 2 years, not to utter the C word, or either of the V words, as it's clear that even mild critiques of government policy are verbatim. That's pure fascism in action. And when finally getting a smidge of a response from the site, it's like attempting to communicate with automated fascists, programmed with a set series of trite and formulaic responses. Their political bias is evident across the site. If you search for a left-wing pundit like Jimmy Dore, you'll immediately be directed to his channel, to his own videos. But if you search for a right-leaning figure like Paul Joseph Watson, then YouTube will shepherd you towards videos that are deeply critical of him. And you'll have to wade through dozens of those before you finally unearth a link to Paul's actual channel. Yet despite all this, the code of conduct of YouTube's parent company, Google, claims that our reputation as a company that our users can trust is our most valuable asset. And it's up to all of us to make sure that we continually earn that trust. All of our communications and other interactions with our users should increase their trust in us. Amazing. That's probably the greatest work of fiction since Harry Potter. Now, a particular favourite case of mine was when Facebook attempted to fact-check the British Medical Journal. The original article had reported on poor clinical trial research practices at Ventavia, a contract research company trialling, you-know-what. But Facebook wrongly labelled it as missing context and then censored it. The Facebook fact-checkers threatened permanent bans on anyone posting the article, despite failing to identify a single error in it. And they even dismissed the reputable, peer-reviewed trade paper, the British Medical Journal, as a news blog. Blimey. It's almost like the fact-checkers are partisan adolescent activists who don't have a damn clue what they're talking about. Now, the censorious bias of these internet giants is apparent on every topic, but it's currently most noticeable on the subject of that recent illness which swept the globe, and which I can't even risk naming lest some YouTube algorithm picks up on it and cancels me yet again. And we've just had the phenomenon of seeing one of the men who developed the medicine being banned from talking about said palliative on YouTube, Twitter and Facebook. Because Twitter knows best, right? And this brings us to cancel culture's biggest recent target, Joe Rogan. It's rather worrying how much widespread support there is for Joe Rogan's cancellation too. Neil Young and Joni Mitchell both spoke up demanding his cancellation. The good old hippie free speech advocates were never very fond of free speech being given to anyone else. And these two chimed in with their opposition as well. They weren't principled enough to return the vast buckets of cash Spotify gave them, but then this is a pair who pleaded for privacy immediately before appearing on Oprah, moving to Hollywood, and churning out an endless stream of press releases. Stephen Colbert also condemned the alleged misinformation on Joe Rogan's show, before immediately giving Whoopi Goldberg a platform to explain why the Holocaust was nothing to do with race. Colbert also used his show to promote Jussie Smollett's faked attack story, the lionisation of Andrew Cuomo, even while Cuomo was covering up the care home deaths debacle, and he pushed the mostly peaceful narrative of the BLM riots, even encouraging Kamala Harris when she urged those rioters not to stop. So he, and Rogan's other critics, might want to pause and think before throwing around the misinformation label. But vast swathes of apparently normal people clamoured for Rogan's cancellation too. Personally, I'd rather listen to evidence and make my own mind up, rather than let a handful of internet billionaires tell me what I'm allowed to hear or think. But I appreciate that's an increasingly and depressingly rare position to hold these days. Now, much of the mainstream media is baffled at Rogan's ballooning popularity, even as their own audience continues to dwindle. Well, let me try and explain it to them. The mainstream media tends to treat their audience like idiots. They patronise and condescend to us, talk down to us like we're 5-year-olds, and continually try to tell us what to think. They also lie, dissemble, omit, and curate the current events to try and push whatever narrative they happen to be selling at that point. They've no intention of letting us think for ourselves, and they're openly appalled at anyone who ever disagrees with them about anything. For just one example, the BBC are utterly unable to disguise the contempt and loathing they have for the great majority of people who are forced by law to pay their vastly inflated wages. Britain's white working class population. Now that's a pretty generalised list of complaints, but it applies to the vast majority of the legacy media's output. And people don't like that. They don't like being lectured and treated like idiots. And they don't warm to the fake, disingenuous and overly forced style of the presenters either. And Joe Rogan? Joe Rogan's the direct opposite of that. Joe Rogan doesn't do interviews. He has conversations. His style is more that of a charismatic man chatting to interesting people in the pub. He's as genuine and open as they come. He doesn't have an agenda to push. He's simply interested in open conversations with interesting people. He doesn't lecture his audience. He doesn't look down on them. He doesn't condescend to them. And he doesn't try and sanctimoniously shepherd them into some allegedly correct position. Rogan's interested in hearing what his guests have to say, rather than in point scoring or gotcha moments. He's also, quite obviously, a decent and natural human being. And people like that. And in the stifling and hectoring climate the media has adapted in recent decades, it's a breath of fresh air. So naturally, his rivals, and all those bitter, petty and intolerant culture warriors, those narrow-minded fools who dominated the narrative for what seems like an eternity, the sort of spiteful children who can't engage with open and honest ideas, and who just seek the security of a narrow agenda they can follow while being beastly and unpleasant to anyone open-minded enough to resist it. They're all out to destroy him too. And over 100 of Rogan's podcasts have now disappeared from Spotify. That's worrying. But what's worse is that Joe Rogan committed the cardinal sin. He apologised. And he looked chastened while doing it. He's likely to be more guarded, more circumspect in future, less free and honest, with half a mind on what his critics might be thinking. That could handcuff him. People really should try to ignore their critics and listen to their fans, because they're the ones his work has connected with. And those who don't like his stuff, well, they can always just switch off. Now, history has shown us that appeasement doesn't work. And recent history has shown us that apologising to the cancel culture mob is like blood to a shark. It just precipitates a feeding frenzy. But more to the point, no one should ever apologise to these people anyway. Because who do they think they are? Do they imagine the world was put here for their amusement? That we must all kowtow to their every whim? They don't like what we do? So what? Why should we give a sniff? Why should we even acknowledge them? For one thing, they sure never apologise for all their bullying tolerance. They've never apologised for all the lives that they've destroyed. To my mind, there are only two appropriate responses to their whining. Ignore them, or tell them to get lost. But Joe didn't. He humbled himself before them. And he looked chastened while doing so. And then he allowed his own work to be deleted. That's appalling. And Joe Rogan is one of the few people in a position to resist this mob. The rest of us, subject to the autocratic, totalitarian whims of the Google gods, need him to take a stand. But he didn't. He crumbled. And in feeding the beast of cancel culture, he's only made it more ravenous than ever. If you want to support this channel, please like, subscribe, and buy my books, available on the links below. They're far more detailed and open than anything I can contemplate doing on our ever more tightly regulated internet. Please do feel free to check them out and let me know what you think. Thank you.